The true map of ancient history lies beneath the waves. Long before satellites or GPS, intrepid cultures turned the open ocean into a global network of trade and ideas. This journey into the lost seafaring civilizations will completely reshape your understanding of human connection, revealing how our world was linked by sea thousands of years earlier than you were taught. We will uncover how the Minoans built a maritime empire with ships that defied the era, and what mysterious knowledge allowed Polynesian navigators to conquer the vast Pacific using only the stars. By the end, you will see the entire globe as a web of ancient sea roads and gain a new appreciation for the daring spirit that pushed humanity to explore. What forgotten story of ocean exploration most makes you reconsider the past? That first glimpse of the open horizon must have been both terrifying and irresistible. For early humans standing on a shoreline, the sea was not a barrier but a question. What lay beyond that endless blue? The earliest answer came in the form of a simple log, a bundle of reeds, or a hollowed-out tree trunk. These were the humble beginnings of a story that would eventually connect the entire world. Driven by a mix of necessity and pure curiosity, our ancestors began to experiment. They needed new fishing grounds, were pushed by shifting climates, or simply felt the undeniable pull of the unknown. This was not a planned expedition but a gradual, daring expansion. Maritime archaeologist Dr. John Hale points out that these initial voyages were monumental leaps of faith, to push away from the safety of the coast and venture into the deep, where the land disappears entirely from view, required a profound psychological shift. It was a redefinition of what was possible. The evidence for these epic journeys is etched into the ancient landscapes we are still uncovering. On islands like Crete and Cyprus, stone tools have been found that could only have arrived by boat, suggesting seafaring activity more than 10,000 years ago. That is millennia before the pyramids of Egypt were even a concept, but the most staggering example lies far to the south. The settlement of Australia required a sea crossing, a voyage that was undertaken an astonishing 50,000 years ago. This was not a casual trip along a coastline. It was a journey across open water, demonstrating that the fundamental skills of ocean navigation are deeply embedded in our history. So how did they do it? They used what the world provided. They lashed logs together to create rafts, bundled papyrus reeds into buoyant boats, and learned to read the language of the ocean itself. They watched the migration patterns of birds, learned to interpret the subtle shifts in wave patterns, and eventually began to navigate by the fixed positions of the stars at night. Each successful voyage, no matter how small, built a body of knowledge passed down through generations. This foundational era of maritime exploration, built on courage and crude technology, set the stage for everything that followed. It was the first quiet chapter in a saga that would lead to the rise of true seafaring empires, whose mysteries we are only beginning to understand. The vibrant ports of ancient Crete were the beating heart of a maritime empire. Here, on the island stronghold of the Minoans, sleek ships were constantly loaded with finely painted pottery, golden olive oil, and ingots of precious metals before setting sail for distant horizons. This was the Bronze Age, and the Minoans were its undisputed masters of the sea. Their civilization was a thalassocracy, a word meaning a state whose power is derived entirely from its naval dominance. From their great palace at Knossos, they wove a web of trade that stretched across the Aegean, reaching the mighty kingdoms of Egypt and the wealthy ports of the Levant. The excavations of Sir Arthur Evans at Knossos brought this maritime culture to life, revealing stunning frescoes that depict these elegant vessels, their sails billowing, cutting through the blue waves. The sea was not just a resource for the Minoans, it was their identity. Their shipbuilding was generations ahead of its time. They constructed vessels that were both graceful and incredibly sturdy, equipped with long banks of oars for maneuverability and large square sails to harness the wind for long, open water journeys. This hybrid design allowed them to travel efficiently regardless of weather, carrying substantial cargoes of goods that were the lifeblood of the ancient world. They established trading posts and small colonies on islands throughout the Aegean, creating a network of safe harbors and friendly ports. Their most critical trade was in the raw materials for bronze itself. They transported Cypriot copper and from even farther afield the tin needed to alloy with it, effectively controlling the technology that defined their era. The sheer scale of their commercial reach was stunningly confirmed by the discovery of the Uluburun shipwreck off the coast of Turkey. This single vessel, resting on the seabed for over 3,000 years, was a time capsule of Bronze Age globalization. Its cargo hold was a treasure trove containing 10 tons of Cypriot copper, a ton of valuable tin, exotic ebony wood from Africa, jars of terebinth resin, and beautiful glass ingots. This was not just a Minoan ship, but a floating microcosm of the entire Mediterranean economy, a testament to the interconnected world the Minoans helped build. So how did they manage such vast and complex operations? They developed one of the first written scripts in Europe, known as Linear A, which archaeologists believe was used extensively to record inventories, trade contracts, and transactions. This bureaucratic innovation was as crucial as their naval architecture, allowing them to manage the flow of goods across vast distances. Yet, for all their power and sophistication, their dominance was not to last. Around the year 1450 BC, a cataclysm, likely a colossal volcanic eruption on the island of Thera followed by massive tsunamis and invasion, shattered their world. Their palaces were burned, their fleet was decimated, and their trade routes collapsed. The sudden fall of the Minoans reveals a profound truth about seafaring empires. Their power, built on open connections, is also uniquely vulnerable. When the ocean highways they mastered were disrupted, their entire civilization crumbled, leaving a power vacuum in the Mediterranean that would soon be filled by a new, equally ambitious people of the sea. From the ashes of the Minoan collapse rose a new kind of maritime power, one built not just on naval might but on the engine of commerce. The Phoenicians transformed the Mediterranean into their marketplace, and their most valuable currency was a color. In the crowded workshops of Tyre, artisans mastered a secret alchemy, harvesting thousands of sea snails to produce a vibrant, color-fast purple dye so rare and expensive it became the ultimate status symbol for royalty across the ancient world. This single luxury item financed an unprecedented commercial empire. To protect their precious trade routes, they engineered a naval revolution. Their shipwrights designed the bireme and later the trireme, warships with 2 and 3 stacked banks of oars that delivered devastating speed and power. These vessels were the apex predators of the ancient seas, allowing Phoenician merchant fleets to travel with confidence, their holds filled with not just purple dye, but also exquisite glass, fine textiles, and cedar wood. Their ambition pushed them beyond the known world. The Greek historian Herodotus recorded their most daring feat, a voyage commissioned by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho around 600 BC. He writes that a Phoenician crew sailed south from the Red Sea, circling the entire continent of Africa and returning to the Mediterranean through the Pillars of Hercules 3 years later. Whether this epic journey is fact or legend, It underscores their phenomenal reputation. They certainly sailed past those pillars into the stormy Atlantic, braving unknown waters to reach the tin-rich British Isles, a metal as vital to the Bronze Age as oil is to our own. To manage this vast commercial network, they needed more than sturdy ships, they needed a system. Their greatest, most enduring innovation was not a ship but a script, the first true alphabet. By simplifying the complex writing systems of the time into just 22 characters representing consonant sounds, they created a flexible tool for recording contracts, inventories, and trade agreements. This phonetic alphabet was so efficient it was adopted and adapted by the Greeks, forming the very foundation of our own Western writing systems. Their expansion was strategic and permanent. They established colonies that grew into powerful cities in their own right. On the coast of North Africa, the city of Carthage was founded, according to legend, by a Phoenician queen named Dido. It began as a simple trading post but would evolve into a maritime superpower that nearly brought Rome to its knees. Another key outpost, Cadiz in Spain, became a hub for goods flowing between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, a testament to their global reach. These colonies were not mere ports, they were nerve centers of a decentralized empire, bound by shared commercial interests and a common culture. The Phoenicians show us that the ocean highways were not just for moving goods, but for transmitting ideas, technologies, and the very building blocks of culture. Their relentless search for resources and markets wove the Western world closer together, setting the stage for the next great chapter of ocean exploration, far from the Mediterranean shores, in the vast waters of the Indian Ocean. While the Phoenicians dominated the Mediterranean, another great civilization was mastering the sea far to the east. The docks of Lothal were a marvel of ancient engineering, where clever lock gates managed the daily tides, creating a stable harbor where ships could be loaded and unloaded with perfect efficiency, regardless of the time of day. This was the Indus Valley civilization, a society of brilliant urban planners and unsung masters of the sea. Thriving along the rivers and coasts of what is now Pakistan and India, they were engaging in maritime trade as early as 2,500 years before the Common Era. For a civilization famed for its grid-patterned cities and advanced drainage, their maritime achievements are a hidden chapter that reveals a global outlook. Archaeologists like S.R. Rao uncovered a massive, brick-lined dockyard at Lothal, complete with a spillway channel to control water levels, a design so effective it would not be out of place centuries later. They also found heavy stone anchors pierced with a hole for a rope, silent testimony to the ships that once called this port home. But where were these ships sailing? The evidence points across the Arabian Sea to the land of Mesopotamia. In the ruins of ancient Sumerian cities like archaeologists have found distinctive Indus Valley seals, small stone objects carved with unicorn-like animals and a still undeciphered script. These seals were used to mark bales of goods, and their presence in Mesopotamia confirms a regular, direct trade route. The Indus people likely exported cotton cloth, a luxury item in the Near East, along with precious timbers, ivory, and carnelian beads. In return, they may have received silver, gold, and other goods. Their success depended on the vessels they built. While no complete hull has been found, impressions on clay and models suggest they constructed sturdy, plank-built boats, sealed with tar or resin to make them watertight. These were not simple river craft but ocean-going vessels, designed with a deep keel to withstand the powerful monsoon winds of the Arabian Sea. How did they ensure fair trade with partners who spoke a different language and used different measures? They pioneered one of history's first systems of standardized weights. Exquisitely carved from stone, these weights followed a precise binary and decimal system. A merchant in Mesopotamia and a merchant in Lothal could use the same set of weights, creating a universal language of commerce that built trust and smoothed transactions across cultures. This was not just an exchange of goods but of ideas. The discovery of a potential Indus trading outpost on the Amoni Peninsula shows just how far their network extended. Through these ports, technologies, artistic styles, and agricultural knowledge flowed in both directions. So why has this maritime dimension been so overlooked? Perhaps because their writing remains a mystery, or because later history overshadowed their achievements. But their hidden seafaring legacy forces us to reconsider the scope of ancient global connections. It reveals a civilization that was not isolated but profoundly adaptable, using innovation to turn the river and sea into highways for cultural and economic exchange. This mastery of inland waterways was a crucial first step, a pattern we see repeated across the globe as cultures learn to navigate their own great rivers before daring the open ocean. The Nile was more than a river, it was a liquid highway flowing through the heart of Egypt. On its steady currents, papyrus reed boats glided silently, carrying grain, stone for monuments, and officials who bound the kingdom together from the delta to the southern cataracts. This mastery of riverine navigation was the foundation of Egypt's power, but their maritime ambitions stretched far beyond the familiar banks of the Nile. They looked east to the volatile waters of the Red Sea and the legendary land of Punt. A magnificent relief at Pharaoh Hatshepsut's temple tells the story of a royal expedition, depicting sturdy ships being constructed, then loaded with exotic treasures. The inscriptions describe the return of a fleet laden with heaps of fragrant myrrh resin, sacks of electrum, ebony logs, and even live myrrh trees to be planted in the temple gardens. Punt was not just a trade partner, it was a source of divine offerings, a place shrouded in myth that affirmed the pharaoh's power to command the very ends of the earth. To reach it, Egyptian shipbuilders had to evolve. They moved beyond the simple, bundled reeds of the Nile, constructing robust seagoing vessels from imported cedar wood, with a strong central keel and a single large square sail. These ships were the workhorses of pharaonic ambition, capable of sailing the Red Sea to reach the coasts of modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. The recent archaeological discovery of the harbor at Wadi al-Jarf, one of the oldest known ports in the world, gives this story a tangible anchor. Here on the Red Sea coast, archaeologists found storage galleries, anchors, and even papyrus logbooks detailing the daily activities of a crew working for the pharaoh Khufu himself. This was not an occasional adventure, but a highly organized state enterprise. How did a civilization so defined by its river manage these oceanic ventures? The Nile taught them the fundamental principles of using currents and winds, a knowledge they then applied to the open sea. Their quest for Punt reveals a worldview that saw the world as connected by water, with Egypt at the center of a web of trade that brought the divine and the exotic to its shores. This skillful use of waterways, both internal and external, sustained their power for millennia, proving that a civilization could be born of a river yet dream of oceans. And while Egypt was mastering its corner of the world on the other side of the globe, a seafaring tradition of almost unimaginable scale was unfolding across the greatest ocean on Earth. The Pacific horizon offered no landmarks, only the rhythmic voice of the sea itself. For the Lapita people, this vast emptiness was not a void but a navigational chart written in the language of nature. Setting out from the islands of near Oceania in elegant double-hull canoes, they embarked on the most audacious expansion in human history, venturing into a part of the globe known as remote Oceania, where islands were scattered like tiny jewels across thousands of kilometers of open ocean. Their vessels were floating arks carrying entire communities along with the precious cargo that would ensure their survival. Taro shoots, breadfruit saplings, and domesticated animals like pigs and chickens shared space with families, all trusting in the skill of the navigators. These sailors possessed a science of wayfinding so profound it feels almost like magic to us today. As anthropologist Patrick Kirch explains, they did not use maps or instruments. Instead, they memorized the star paths, knowing which constellations rose and set over specific islands. They watched for the faint, greenish reflection of a lagoon on the underside of distant clouds. Most remarkably, they learned to read the ocean swells, feeling the subtle deflection of waves as they bounced off unseen islands far beyond the horizon, a skill akin to listening to the ocean's echo. This deep knowledge was their most valued possession, preserved and passed down through generations in intricate oral traditions, chants, and stick charts that mapped the behavior of the sea, not the land. The evidence of their incredible journeys is stamped into the earth itself. From the Bismarck Archipelago all the way to Samoa, they left a distinct cultural signature, a style of pottery decorated with intricate geometric patterns made by stamping the clay with a toothed tool. At sites like Tiauma in Vanuatu, we find their settlements and burials, proving they successfully reached islands that had never before felt a human footprint. What drove them to undertake such perilous voyages? It was likely a combination of population pressure, a spirit of exploration, and the search for new resources. Their voyages were not just one-way trips. They maintained extensive trade networks across the vast distances they had conquered, exchanging valuable goods like obsidian for tool-making and shells for ornamentation. This connectivity meant that even the most isolated communities were part of a larger cultural world. Their arrival on each new island was a moment of profound ecological transformation. They brought with them a transported landscape, a package of plants and animals that forever altered these pristine environments, creating the foundation for the unique ecosystems of the Pacific we know today. The Lapita saga stands as a parallel achievement to the seafaring empires of the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, yet it was accomplished with a different kind of technology, one built on an intimate, generational dialogue with the natural world. Their story forces us to ask how many other epic voyages have been lost to time, their stories swallowed by the very seas they mastered. The creak of oak and the bite of sea spray filled the air as the Norse longship carved a path through the North Atlantic. This was not a vessel of the Mediterranean sun, but a masterpiece of northern engineering, designed to conquer both the open ocean and the shallowest river. With their iconic dragon-headed prows, these ships became the symbol of an age defined by expansion, carrying Vikings from their Scandinavian homelands to the very edge of the known world. Their shipbuilding was their superpower. The longship, with its shallow draft and symmetrical ends, could land on any beach and be rowed upriver, enabling lightning-fast raids deep inland. But for crossing vast oceans, they relied on the Nar, a broader, deeper-hulled cargo ship designed for stability and capacity, capable of carrying livestock, settlers, and trade goods across the treacherous waves. The saga's epic poems passed down orally give voice to these incredible journeys. The Saga of Eric the Red tells of his exile from Iceland, his discovery of a new land he shrewdly named Greenland to attract settlers, and the subsequent voyages led by his son, Leif Erikson, to a place they called Vinland, a land of wild grapes and forests. For centuries, these tales were thought to be mere legend. Then, in the 1960s, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a Norse settlement at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland. The discovery of sod buildings, a forge, and artifacts like a bronze cloak pin confirmed a truth that rewrote history. Europeans had reached North America centuries before Columbus. Their navigation was as ingenious as their shipbuilding. Under perpetually cloudy northern skies, they may have used a sunstone, a crystal-like Iceland spar that can polarize light, to locate the sun's position even when it was completely hidden. This, combined with their deep knowledge of seabirds, whale migrations, and wave patterns, allowed them to traverse thousands of kilometers of trackless sea. What drove this relentless expansion? It was a complex mix of population pressure, a thirst for prestige, and the lure of wealth. They established trade routes that stretched from the Middle East to the Canadian coast, dealing in prized commodities like furs, amber, and especially walrus ivory, which was as valuable as gold in medieval Europe. Their settlement in Greenland stands as a testament to their adaptability, a community that thrived for centuries by raising livestock and hunting in an incredibly harsh environment. Yet, Greenland also reveals the fragility of such distant outposts. When the climate cooled during the Little Ice Age, trade routes were cut off, and contact with the homeland faded. The colony ultimately vanished. Their eventual withdrawal from North America speaks to the immense challenges of maintaining connections across such vast distances, where even the most resilient seafarers could be defeated by shifting climates and isolation. The Norse voyages proved the Atlantic was never a barrier, but a cold, challenging highway that connected continents. As their dragon ships faded into legend, another maritime network was reaching its zenith in the warm, spice-laden waters of Southeast Asia. The wealth of an empire flowed through a narrow strait. In the strategic waters of the Malacca Strait, the Srivijaya Empire built a maritime kingdom that thrived for 6 centuries from the 7th to the 13th. This was not an empire of vast farmland or mountain fortresses, but a thalassocracy whose power came from its absolute control over the sea lanes. Every ship traveling between the economic giants of China and India had to pass through its watery domain, and the Srivijayan fleet ensured they paid a toll for the privilege. This steady stream of taxes on silk, spices, and gems financed a civilization of remarkable sophistication on the island of Sumatra. The Chinese Buddhist pilgrim Zheng spent years studying there, and his writings paint a vivid picture of a bustling cosmopolitan hub. He described Srivijaya as a major center for Buddhist scholarship, where thousands of monks gathered to learn before making the journey to India. Its ports were a symphony of different languages, where Arab Dhow sailors, Indian merchants, and Chinese officials mingled in markets fragrant with cloves, pepper, and sandalwood. The empire's power was projected by its navy, a fleet of sturdy, ocean-going vessels that patrolled the straits. They suppressed piracy, protected their commercial interests, and exerted influence over coastal regions from the Malay Peninsula to parts of Java. This naval dominance was complemented by shrewd diplomacy. They sent multiple diplomatic missions to the Tang dynasty court in China, securing formal recognition and favorable trading status that locked in their economic prosperity for generations. The archaeological site of their capital, Palembang, reveals the extent of their urban development. Excavations have uncovered remnants of stilt houses built over the Musi River, vast quantities of Chinese ceramics, and golden artifacts inscribed with old Malay scripts, all pointing to a wealthy and sophisticated urban center. Srivijayan society was a unique blend, a fusion of indigenous Malay culture with strong influences from India, particularly in its court rituals, art, and religious life. They adopted Hindu and Buddhist traditions, weaving them into the local fabric to create a distinct identity that commanded respect across the region. This model of power, based on controlling vital choke points and managing vast commercial networks rather than conquering large territories, would be echoed by later maritime empires like the Portuguese and the Dutch. So what caused the decline of this enduring civilization? A shift in trade patterns, the silting of their rivers, and the rise of aggressive new rivals like the Java-based Majapahit Empire gradually eroded their control. Their influence waned when they could no longer guarantee the safety and profitability of the sea roads they once commanded. Yet their legacy lived on, shaping the language, culture, and political traditions of subsequent Southeast Asian states like Malacca. Their story is a powerful testament to how a civilization could be built not on land, but on the mastery of ocean highways. As the influence of Srivijaya receded in the east, the maritime world of the Mediterranean was being violently reforged, its old routes seized by a new and relentless power from the Italian peninsula. The sleek, three-tiered trireme was the ultimate expression of Athenian naval power, a floating engine of war driven by the synchronized muscle of 170 rowers. In the narrow straits of Salamis, this coordination proved decisive, as the outnumbered Greek fleet used superior maneuverability to crush the invading Persian armada. The historian Thucydides would later argue that this naval victory was the true birth of Athenian empire, proving that control of the sea lanes was more valuable than any fortress on land. The Greeks perfected the trireme for battle, but it was the Romans who mastered the sea for commerce and control. They transformed the entire Mediterranean into what they proudly called Mare Nostrum, our sea. This was not an empty boast. To feed the million citizens of Rome, the empire required a constant, massive inflow of grain, primarily from Egypt and North Africa. This was the mission of the massive cargo ships, the corbetti, which could carry hundreds of tons of wheat across the open water in a single voyage. These merchant vessels were the true lifeline of the empire, far broader and sturdier than warships, relying on a single large square sail to traverse the vast distances. How did they manage such complex logistics? They built the infrastructure to support it. The great lighthouse of Pharos at Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, stood as a beacon for every ship entering the harbor, its fire reflected by polished bronze mirrors to guide sailors safely to port. In Rome's primary harbor at Ostia, enormous warehouses lined the docks where goods from across the known world were unloaded, sorted, and stored. The scale was staggering, with imports flowing in from as far away as China, passed through a long chain of intermediaries. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder lamented the vast sums of wealth flowing east to India for luxuries like pepper, silks, and gemstones. To protect this vital economic network, the Roman navy evolved. They adopted and refined the lighter, faster Liburnian, a ship based on Illyrian pirate vessels, which allowed their fleets to patrol coastlines and hunt down the pirates who threatened the grain supply. This maritime dominance was backed by the first formal codes of maritime law, which standardized contracts, established liability for lost cargo, and created a predictable legal environment for merchants. The Greek and Roman approaches reveal 2 sides of maritime power. The Greeks demonstrated how naval supremacy could win wars and build an empire of influence, while the Romans showed how that power could be institutionalized to fuel and protect a globalized economy. Their combined legacy in ship design, harbor engineering, and naval strategy would set the standard for European seafaring for more than 1,000 years. Yet, even as Rome secured its inland sea, another ancient maritime network was reaching a spectacular zenith, one that connected the entire Indian Ocean basin through the power of the monsoon winds. The creaking cog ship was the beating heart of a commercial revolution in the cold northern seas. These broad-beamed, single-masted vessels, with their massive cargo holds, became the trucks of the medieval world, carrying the raw materials that built cities from London to Novgorod. Their success was powered not by a king or an emperor, but by a groundbreaking idea, a cooperative alliance of merchant guilds from nearly 200 towns known as the Hanseatic League. For 4 centuries, this network of German cities, with Lübeck at its helm, forged a maritime empire built on contracts and mutual interest rather than conquest. Their strength lay in their unity. By banding together, these independent merchant communities could negotiate favorable trading terms, establish standardized commercial laws, and pool their resources to protect their ships from the pirates that plagued the Baltic and North Seas. The League's foundational principle was simple: safety and profit through collective action. At key foreign ports, they established fortified trading posts called contours. In the Norwegian city of Bergen, the Briggen Wharf became a bustling, self-contained German enclave where Hanseatic merchants lived and worked, stockpiling dried cod from the north. In Bruges, the gateway to the wealthy markets of Flanders, their contour ensured that Baltic grain and timber flowed smoothly westward in exchange for fine Flemish cloth. These outposts were more than just offices. They were the nerve centers of a decentralized commercial state, enforcing the League's strict quality control on goods and creating a predictable, trusted environment for trade. How did they maintain such discipline across such vast distances? They developed their own maritime legal code and held regular diets or assemblies where representatives from member cities resolved disputes and coordinated policy. This legal innovation was as important as any ship design, providing a framework of trust that allowed commerce to flourish. Their naval power was never a standing army, but a fleet that could be summoned when needed to blockade rivals or punish those who threatened their privileges. The goods they carried defined the economy of Northern Europe. They transported vast quantities of salted herring, a staple food for the Christian world, along with Prussian grain, Russian furs, and the sun-gold amber of the Baltic coast. This constant exchange did more than just enrich merchants. It fostered a remarkable cultural melting pot in port cities. Architectural styles, artistic trends, and even words blended together, spreading urban culture and legal concepts like town charters far and wide. So why did this powerful network eventually fade? The rise of strong, centralized nation-states like England and the Netherlands began to challenge the League's privileged position. These new powers wanted to control their own trade, and they built their own powerful navies. As global exploration opened new sea routes to the Americas and Asia, the economic center of gravity shifted away from the Baltic, making the League's once dominant position less critical. The Hanseatic League story is a powerful lesson in the life cycle of a network. It shows that the most resilient maritime power is not always the one with the biggest warships, but the one that best masters the art of connection and cooperation. Their legacy reminds us that the ocean has always been a space for building complex partnerships, a truth that would soon be tested as European ships began to venture beyond their familiar horizons into a world of terrifying and wondrous possibility. A master navigator named Maupiilug once stood on the deck of a voyaging canoe in the open Pacific, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest land, and pointed to a destination no one else could see. He was reading a map written not on parchment, but in the living world around him. This was the essence of Polynesian wayfinding, a skill so refined it allowed them to conquer the Pacific Ocean, settling every habitable island across a triangle stretching from Hawaii to New Zealand to Rapa Nui. Their vessel was the Waikolua, a double-hulled canoe that was a masterpiece of practical design. Two narrow hulls connected by a sturdy platform created a stable base that could withstand the ocean's power. A single oceanic crab-claw sail harnessed the wind with incredible efficiency, driving the vessel forward while allowing it to sail remarkably close to the wind. This was not just a boat, it was a self-sufficient ark. Its hollow hulls and central platform carried everything needed to start a new life, bundles of taro shoots, sweet potato cuttings, breadfruit saplings, and cages holding precious pigs, chickens, and dogs. The true engine of these voyages, however, was not the canoe itself, but the knowledge carried in the mind of the navigator. These men, known as PWO, underwent decades of rigorous training. They committed to memory the precise rising and setting points of hundreds of stars, creating a mental star compass that turned the night sky into a reliable guide. By day, they watched the ocean itself. They learned to feel the subtle deflection of deep ocean swells as they bounced off unseen islands far beyond the horizon, a skill akin to listening to the ocean's echo. They knew that certain birds, like the golden plover, flew out to sea to fish each morning and returned to land each evening, so their flight path at dusk pointed the way home. The presence of specific cloud formations or a particular greenish tint on their undersides could betray a distant lagoon. This vast body of knowledge was preserved not in writing, but through chants, stories, and intricate stick charts that mapped the behavior of waves and currents, not the islands themselves. For a long time, modern scholars doubted such feats were possible without instruments. Then came the experimental voyages of the canoe Hokule'a. In 1976, with Maupiilug as navigator, Hokule'a sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti using only these traditional methods, proving beyond doubt the accuracy and power of this ancient science. Their colonization was an intentional act of world-building. They did not just find islands, they brought their world with them, transforming pristine ecosystems into productive homelands. This explains the incredible linguistic and cultural similarities found across the Polynesian Triangle, from the Maori of New Zealand to the native Hawaiians. They were not isolated communities, but the scattered children of a single seafaring culture. The settlement of Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, stands as one of their most breathtaking achievements. Finding that tiny, remote speck of land required a deliberate voyage of over 2,000 kilometers into the empty Eastern Pacific, a journey that defies modern comprehension. So what caused the long voyages to eventually cease in places like Easter Island? The reasons were likely both environmental and social. On some isolated islands, valuable timber for building large canoes was eventually depleted. As populations grew and established their own unique identities, the impetus for maintaining risky long-distance contact may have faded, turning their attention inward. Yet, the legacy of the Polynesian voyages is a profound reminder that human exploration is driven as much by cultural memory and a deep dialogue with nature as by any physical tool. Their story is a brilliant thread in the global tapestry of seafaring, one that challenges us to expand our very definition of what technology can be. The scale of Admiral Zheng, his treasure fleet, defies belief. When his armada set sail in the early 15th century, it was not a handful of ships but a floating city. The largest of these vessels, the legendary treasure ships, were said to be over 400 feet long, their decks vast enough to swallow a European caravel whole. For nearly 3 decades, this immense naval power projected Ming dynasty influence across the Indian Ocean, from Southeast Asia all the way to the coast of East Africa. It was a spectacle of pure maritime might, a demonstration of Chinese engineering and organizational genius that occurred decades before Columbus or Da Gama were even born. The official records kept by Zheng, his companions like Ma Huan, describe these voyages not as missions of conquest, but of diplomacy and awe. They carried imperial letters and lavish gifts, silk, porcelain, and gold, to establish tributary relationships with distant rulers from Malacca to Mogadishu. In return, they received exotic animals like giraffes, which were presented at the imperial court as symbols of heaven's favor. The entire operation was a state-funded enterprise on a staggering scale, involving hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of sailors, soldiers, translators, and doctors. How did they navigate such vast, unfamiliar waters? They employed the most advanced technology of the age, including detailed sailing charts and sophisticated magnetic compasses housed in special compartments for accurate readings. These tools, combined with the knowledge of Arab and Indian pilots they encountered, allowed them to traverse known trade routes and push beyond them. The motivation was a complex mix of politics and economics. The Yongle Emperor sought to legitimize his rule by showcasing China's power to the world and controlling the lucrative trade in luxury goods. Porcelain from Jingdezhen and exquisite silks flowed out, while spices, rare woods, and gemstones flowed back. Yet this golden age of exploration was shockingly brief. Following the emperor's death, a new faction gained power in the imperial court. These scholar officials saw the voyages as a colossal waste of resources, arguing that the treasury was being drained for little tangible gain. They believed China's focus should be inward, on fortifying the Great Wall and managing domestic agriculture. In a dramatic reversal, the voyages were halted, the records burned, and the very shipyards that built the colossal treasure ships were dismantled. China deliberately scuttled its own naval supremacy. The legacy of Zheng He, however, was not so easily erased. Chinese ceramics from this period have been unearthed in coastal sites from Kenya to Oman, silent proof of those fleeting connections. What if the political winds had blown differently? What if those fleets had continued westward, perhaps even rounding the Cape of Good Hope? The world map might have been drawn in Mandarin. Instead, as China turned its back on the ocean, the vacuum it left behind was soon filled by very different kinds of ships, carrying very different ambitions from the western edge of the world. The elegant curve of a lateen sail catches the wind, a triangular silhouette against the Indian Ocean sun. For centuries, these iconic Arabian dhows were the vital link in a trade network that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the coast of Africa. They moved with the rhythm of the planet itself, harnessing the predictable monsoon winds that blew ships southwest in the summer and northeast in the winter, creating a reliable annual clock for commerce. This was not a system of chance, but of profound meteorological understanding. Arab merchants and sailors became the master conductors of this oceanic symphony, their vessels laden with frankincense and myrrh from Arabia, pearls from the Gulf, fine textiles, and dates, all destined for the bustling ports of India and beyond. The medieval geographer Al-Masudi wrote vividly of the prosperity this trade brought, describing ports like Sohar in Oman and Aden in Yemen as thriving crossroads where the world's goods and ideas converged. In these harbors, the dialects of merchants from a dozen lands blended into a common commercial language. This exchange went far beyond material goods. Along with spices and gems, Arab traders carried groundbreaking advancements in mathematics, including the concept of zero, and sophisticated astronomical tables that refined celestial navigation. The design of the dhow itself was a marvel of adaptation. Its stitched plank construction gave the hull flexibility to withstand pounding waves, while the lateen sail allowed for efficient sailing into the wind, a feature that gave them a significant advantage over square-rigged European ships for centuries. Their business practices were equally advanced. They pioneered early forms of credit and partnership, allowing merchants to finance risky voyages by pooling capital and sharing both the dangers and the profits. This economic innovation enabled them to dominate the routes for generations. Their influence was permanently stamped onto the map through the establishment of trading colonies along the Swahili coast. The city of Kilwa, on an island off modern Tanzania, grew into a powerful sultanate, its wealth built entirely on the gold, ivory, and slaves flowing from the African interior. Here, Arab influence blended with local Bantu cultures to create a unique Swahili civilization, a cosmopolitan world of coral stone palaces and mosques where Islam took root and spread not by the sword, but through peaceful maritime contact. How did this Dhow trade network shape the Indian Ocean world? It created a deeply integrated economic and cultural zone, a precursor to our own globalized age, where a merchant from Basra could feel at home in a port in Madagascar. Their enduring legacy is a powerful lesson in how ocean highways can weave diverse peoples into a shared tapestry of commerce and culture. Far from the world of Chinese treasure ships and Arabian dhows, another maritime story was unfolding, written not on open oceans but along the rugged coastlines and vast inland waters of the Americas. On the high-altitude expanse of Lake Titicaca, the Yoros people built entire islands and boats from the Totora reed, creating a floating world perfectly adapted to their environment. This was not an isolated curiosity, but part of a rich, overlooked tapestry of indigenous American seafaring. For thousands of years, from the icy fjords of the Pacific Northwest to the warm Caribbean, the peoples of the Americas mastered their own waterways with ingenuity and deep cultural purpose. The evidence for this connection is ancient and profound. In the coastal deserts of Chile, the Chinchorro people developed the world's oldest known mummification practices more than 7,000 years ago. Their culture was sustained entirely by the sea, their middens filled with the bones of fish, seabirds, and marine mammals. They were not just living by the coast, they were living of the ocean, a relationship that shaped their entire worldview and their most sacred rituals. When Spanish explorers arrived in the Caribbean, they were astonished by what they found. They documented the Taino using massive, elegant canoes, some hollowed from a single giant tree and capable of carrying up to 100 people. These were not simple fishing boats, but vessels of trade, communication, and warfare that connected a vast archipelago. They facilitated a lively exchange of goods, ideas, and people across hundreds of miles of open water. The variety of watercraft was as diverse as the landscapes themselves. Along the Pacific coast of South America, skilled mariners constructed sophisticated rafts from balsa wood logs, using cotton sails and clever centerboards to navigate the strong currents. These vessels were capable of remarkable offshore journeys, leading to one of archaeology's most tantalizing mysteries. The sweet potato, a crop native to South America, was found growing across Polynesia long before European contact. Similarly, chicken bones from Polynesia have been discovered at an ancient site in Chile. This biological evidence strongly suggests that these two great seafaring cultures, the Polynesians and the South Americans, made contact, trading goods and species across the vast eastern Pacific. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Northwest, towering cedar trees were transformed into monumental dugout canoes. For cultures like the Haida and the Tlingit, these canoes were the fundamental tool of life. They enabled a complex network of trade that stretched from Alaska to California, moving coveted goods like dentalium shells, copper plates, and even slaves. The cultural significance of these voyages was immense. Canoes were central to potlatch ceremonies and origin stories, celebrated in art and oral histories as symbols of status, identity, and spiritual power. So why have these robust maritime traditions been so consistently marginalized in our history books? The answer lies in a long-standing bias that viewed the Americas as fundamentally isolated continents, and that measured technological progress by a very narrow, old-world standard. The story of American seafaring forces us to abandon that outdated view. It reveals a hemisphere crisscrossed by aquatic highways, where peoples demonstrated incredible adaptability, building complex societies and far-reaching connections through their own unique mastery of the water. Their stories are not footnotes but essential chapters in the global saga of human exploration. The knowledge that conquered the Pacific was held not in books but in memory. An elder would sit with a young apprentice under a canopy of stars, teaching them to see the sky not as a random scattering of lights, but as a fixed compass. Each star had a name, a story, and a precise path that marked the direction to a specific, far-off island. This was the core of oral tradition, a living library of navigation that for generations guided voyages across thousands of miles of open ocean. The entire system was breathtakingly sophisticated, built on a deep, generational dialogue with the natural world. Navigators learned to feel the subtle shifts in ocean swells beneath the hull, interpreting how they bent around unseen islands beyond the horizon. They watched the flight patterns of seabirds at dusk, knowing they would lead back to land. They could identify the faint, greenish reflection of a lagoon on the underside of distant clouds. This complex science was encoded into chants, stories, and dances, passed down from master to apprentice through years of rigorous, practical training. Yet this vast body of knowledge proved incredibly fragile. With the arrival of European ships, colonization, and modern technologies like the compass and the chronometer, these ancient skills began to vanish at an alarming rate. The old ways were often dismissed as primitive superstition, and the younger generations were drawn away from the canoes by new economies and lifestyles. The very purpose of this deep learning, the long-distance voyaging that sustained it, faded from memory. By the mid-20th century, it was feared that the ability to navigate the Pacific without instruments had been lost forever. This is where the work of anthropologists like David Lewis became vital. He sailed with the few remaining traditional navigators in the Pacific, men from islands like Puluwat in Micronesia. He documented their techniques not as quaint customs, but as a highly effective and empirical science of wayfinding. Lewis proved that these mariners used mental star compasses and could hold a course for weeks using only their senses, validating a system that Western science had long considered impossible. His work helped spark a reawakening, a movement to reclaim what had been nearly lost. The most powerful example of this revival is the story of the Hokule'a. In the 1970s, a group in Hawaii built a replica of a traditional Polynesian double-hulled voyaging canoe. Their goal was not just to build a boat, but to prove a point that their ancestors had intentionally and skillfully settled the Pacific. The project faced a profound crisis. They had the canoe, but no one in Hawaii remembered how to navigate without instruments. They had to seek out one of the last living masters, Maupi'ailug from the small island of Satawul. He generously shared his knowledge, guiding the Hokule'a on its historic voyage from Hawaii to Tahiti in 1976. The success of that journey ignited a cultural renaissance across Polynesia, restoring a deep sense of pride and identity. It proved that lost skills could be reclaimed, and it inspired a new generation to learn the old ways. This revival also saved other unique forms of maritime knowledge, like the Marshall Islands stick charts. These are not maps of land, but intricate frameworks of palm ribs and shells that model the behavior of ocean swells and currents as they interact with islands. They are a physical representation of a hydrographic science that understood wave patterns in a way modern science is only beginning to appreciate. Their near loss and recovery underscore a crucial truth: that history is not just contained in physical artifacts like pottery or sunken ships, but in intangible heritage, in living memory and practiced skill. So what is the value of this reclaimed knowledge in our modern world of GPS and satellite imagery? It teaches us a different way of seeing. It reminds us that true exploration requires a deep connection to the environment, an ability to read the subtle signs of the natural world. In an age of climate change, these ancient, sustainable methods of navigation offer a powerful lesson in observation and adaptation. They show that the most advanced technology can sometimes be the human mind, trained by generations of accumulated wisdom. Preserving this knowledge is a race against time, a global effort to safeguard not just the history of seafaring, but a vital part of our shared human ingenuity. The ingenuity of ancient shipwrights transformed humble materials into vessels that could challenge the open sea. In Mesopotamia, the very land gave rise to the boat as artisans gathered vast quantities of papyrus reeds from the riverbanks. They would tightly bind these reeds into sturdy, buoyant bundles, shaping them into graceful, curved hulls that were both flexible and remarkably seaworthy. These were not crude rafts but sophisticated craft, often coated with bitumen to make them watertight, capable of carrying trade goods along the Tigris and Euphrates and venturing into the Persian Gulf. This same principle of using locally sourced materials was applied across the world, from the tar-sealed plank boats of the Indus Valley to the totora reed boats of Lake Titicaca. Each design was a direct response to the environment, a perfect marriage of need and available resource, but the true revolution came with the shift to wood. The discovery of the Kyrenia shipwreck off the coast of Cyprus gives us a breathtakingly intimate look at this evolution. This Hellenistic merchant vessel, resting on the seabed for over 2 millennia, reveals a hull built with overlapping planks, a technique known as shell-first construction. The wood shows evidence of careful repair, with new timbers scarfed seamlessly into the old, proving that these ships were valued assets, maintained for decades of service across the Mediterranean. The Romans later perfected this with massive cargo ships, the corbetti, which used multiple square sails to harness the wind efficiently, creating true heavy lifters of the ancient world. Guiding these wooden giants required a science of navigation that was both intuitive and brilliantly precise. On perpetually overcast northern seas, Viking navigators may have used a sunstone, a crystal of Iceland spar that could polarize sunlight, revealing the sun's position even through dense cloud cover. In the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, Arab and Chinese pilots used different tools for the same goal. The Arab camel was a simple but effective rectangle of wood attached to a string. The navigator would hold the knot in his teeth and move the board until it exactly framed the height of the North Star above the horizon, providing a direct measurement of latitude. This was celestial navigation made portable and practical. The Greek writer Pliny the Elder described another vital tool, the lead line. Sailors would lower a lead weight coated in tallow to the seabed, not only to measure depth and avoid running aground, but also to bring up a sample of the seafloor. A skilled pilot could identify his approximate location by whether the lead came up coated in sand, mud, or shells. The most staggering artifact, however, is the Antikythera mechanism. Recovered from a Roman shipwreck, this complex bronze gearwork device was an astronomical computer capable of predicting the movement of planets and the timing of eclipses. It suggests a level of mechanical sophistication for calculating celestial positions that was utterly unprecedented in the ancient world. This technology was supported by critical infrastructure on land. The Great Lighthouse of Alexandria, with its fire reflected by polished bronze mirrors, guided ships safely to port from miles away. Harbors like Ostia were engineering marvels, with breakwaters, deep basins, and vast warehouses that formed the logistical backbone of maritime trade. Knowledge was also compiled into written sailing directions, known as peripli, which listed ports, landmarks, and safe anchorages. The spread of these technologies was itself a function of the sea roads they created. A shipbuilding technique developed in the Mediterranean might appear centuries later in the Indian Ocean, carried by merchants and copied by local craftsmen. Yet for all their brilliance, ancient mariners still faced profound limitations. Their voyages were seasonal, dictated by wind patterns like the monsoons. They had no accurate way to measure longitude, making east-west travel a matter of estimation and dead reckoning. They sailed in constant fear of storms, pirates, and shipworms that could devour a wooden hull. Understanding their tools does more than just explain how they sailed. It reveals the immense courage it took to use them. With a wooden board, a knotted string, and a deeply encoded knowledge of the stars, they undertook voyages that seem incredible even today, pushing the boundaries of the known world one innovation at a time. A diver's hand gently brushes away millennia of sediment, revealing the curve of a clay amphora, its surface still bearing the fingerprints of the person who shaped it. This single object, resting in the silent darkness, is a direct line to a bustling Mediterranean port, a merchant haggling over its price, and a ship's crew trusting their lives to the sea. Underwater archaeology has given us the ability to reach through time and touch these lost moments, transforming our understanding of ancient seafaring from a collection of legends into a detailed, tangible history. Before pioneers like George Bass began applying rigorous scientific methods to the seabed, shipwrecks were merely targets for treasure hunters. Bass' work at Cape Gelidonia in the 1960s established a new standard, treating a sunken site as an archaeological dig, where every fragment of wood, every broken pot, and even the ballast stones are mapped and analyzed for the story they tell. This meticulous approach allows us to read a shipwreck like a lost ledger book. The incredible Uluburun wreck, for instance, was not just a ship, it was a floating snapshot of the entire late Bronze Age economy. By analyzing its cargo, we know it carried 10 tons of Cypriot copper and a ton of precious tin, the exact recipe for bronze. We can trace its planned route, identify its ports of call, and understand the complex trade agreements that must have existed between kingdoms we thought were only loosely connected. This is a history written not in words but in ingots and amphorae. The tools of this trade have evolved dramatically. Side-scan sonar paints a detailed picture of the seafloor, revealing anomalies that could be a buried hull. Magnetometers detect the faint magnetic signature of metal objects, like anchors or cargo, hidden beneath the sand. For deep water sites beyond the reach of divers, remotely operated vehicles act as the archaeologist's eyes and hands, sending back crystal-clear video and carefully retrieving artifacts from the abyss. Perhaps the most delicate task is preserving what the sea has guarded for so long. Waterlogged wood, if exposed to air too quickly, will shrink and crack into splinters. Through a slow, careful process of chemical treatment, these fragile timbers are stabilized, allowing us to reconstruct the precise dimensions and construction techniques of a vessel, revealing the shipwrights mined centuries after the launch. The discovery of the Dhow wreck in Greek waters pushes the timeline of complex maritime trade back to an astonishing 4,200 years ago, proving that organized seafaring was not a late development but a fundamental part of human civilization from its earliest chapters. Each of these wrecks represents a single, catastrophic failure, a voyage that ended in tragedy. But in doing so, they illuminate the countless successful journeys that left no trace. They force us to ask what drove merchants and kingdoms to take such immense risks. The answer lies in the cargo itself, a testament to the powerful economic forces that made the rewards worth the peril. These sunken time capsules are the ultimate archive, waiting on the ocean floor to rewrite the stories we think we know. The true wealth of empires was measured not in conquered territory, but in the fragrant holds of merchant ships. In the bustling ports of Alexandria or the Malacca Strait, the air was thick with the scent of exotic spices, the shouts of traders in a dozen languages, and the clink of weights balancing on scales. This was the engine of the ancient world, a global economy running on maritime trade. The motivation was often luxury, goods so rare and desirable they justified immense risk. A first-century Greco-Roman text known as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea reads like a merchant's shopping list for the super-rich of Rome, detailing where to find the finest ivory from East Africa, tortoise shell for ornate furniture, and the pungent frankincense vital for religious ceremonies. A single successful voyage could make a merchant's fortune, but it required a sophisticated commercial system to function across vast cultural divides. How did a Roman trader with Latin scrolls do business with a Tamil merchant in southern India? They relied on universally accepted mechanisms of trust. Standardized currencies like the Roman denarius or the Athenian owl tetradrachm became a common language of value, but cash was not always practical for such large transactions, so early forms of credit and contractual agreements emerged. A merchant in Tyre might provide goods to a ship's captain based on a written promise of payment upon the voyage's safe return, a system that distributed risk and fueled investment. Intermediaries were the unsung heroes of this system, bilingual traders who acted as cultural and commercial bridges, negotiating deals and ensuring that measures and values were understood by all parties. This flow of goods transformed local economies. Regions began to specialize in what they could produce best for the global market. Some areas focused on mining copper, while others dedicated vast landscapes to cultivating grapes for wine or weaving fine linen. Port cities like Carthage or Lothal grew into cosmopolitan hubs where a sailor from Phoenicia might settle down next to a family from Egypt, their cultures blending into something new. States understood that this commerce was their lifeblood, and they built their power around it. They derived enormous revenue from import and export tariffs, taxes collected on every amphora of wine or sack of grain that crossed their docks. This income financed navies, which in turn protected the sea lanes from pirates, ensuring the continued flow of wealth. The legendary silk trade between Han China and Imperial Rome is a perfect example of this interconnected web. While the famous Silk Road carried goods overland, a significant portion of this trade moved by sea. Chinese silk would be transported to Indian ports, where it was traded for pepper and gems, then carried by Arab and Indian merchants on Dhows across the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea, finally reaching Roman hands. This maritime leg was often safer and could carry bulkier goods, showing how ocean routes complemented and completed land-based networks. The relentless pursuit of profit pushed ships farther than any map could show, weaving distant peoples into a web of mutual dependence. This ancient globalization, driven by the economics of the sea, did more than just move merchandise. It built the foundation of our modern world, proving that commerce has always been a powerful current in human history. A Greek philosopher in Alexandria could debate the stars with a scholar from India because the same ships that carried spices and silk also carried ideas. The ocean highways were the internet of the ancient world, transmitting the very foundations of culture, faith, and science across continents. This exchange transformed religions as they traveled. Buddhism, for instance, did not march to Southeast Asia by land alone. It sailed on merchant vessels from the ports of India. As these traders established communities in places like Srivijaya, they built stupas and temples. The statues of the Buddha that began to appear there tell a fascinating story of fusion. The serene, classically influenced features from the Greco-Buddhist art of Gandhara carried west, now blended with local artistic traditions in Sumatra and Java, creating something entirely new. This was not a simple copy, but a creative adaptation, a conversation in stone and bronze. Historian John Mixick's work at these sites reveals how these ports were not just commercial hubs, but crucibles of cultural innovation, where Indian cosmology met indigenous animist beliefs and was reinterpreted for a new audience. Languages and technologies were equally mobile. The concept of zero and the decimal system, brilliant innovations from Indian mathematicians, were absorbed by Arab scholars who encountered them in the trading ports of the Indian Ocean. These ideas were then carried further on Arab dhows into the Mediterranean, where they eventually reshaped European science and commerce. A ship's hull itself could be a piece of transferred technology. The lateen sail, so characteristic of Arabian and Indian Ocean vessels, was later adopted by Mediterranean sailors for its superior ability to sail against the wind. In the other direction, the sturdy hull-first construction of Roman ships likely influenced boat-building traditions in the Red Sea and beyond. Even food tells this story. The humble chicken, native to Southeast Asia, found its way to Europe and Africa. The citron from Mesopotamia was traded to the Mediterranean. Every time a new spice was unloaded at a foreign dock, it had the potential to revolutionize an entire cuisine. The individuals who facilitated this were the multilingual traders and diplomats, the cultural translators of their age. They were the ones who could explain a contract, translate a religious text, or negotiate the delicate protocols between a foreign merchant and a local king. In busy ports, these interactions led to the establishment of permanent foreign enclaves, complete with their own temples, mosques, or synagogues, which became permanent nodes of cultural exchange. This blending was not always seamless. Tensions could arise between established local traditions and new, foreign ideas. The very act of adopting a new god or a new style could be seen as a rejection of the old ways, creating social friction. Yet, the archaeological record is filled with evidence of this fusion. Look at the Hellenistic city of Ai Khanoum, far inland in Afghanistan. Though distant from any ocean, its existence was made possible by the trade routes that connected the Mediterranean to Central Asia and India. There, a Greek-style gymnasium stood not far from a temple incorporating Indian architectural elements, a stunning testament to how far the ripple effects of maritime exchange could reach. These ocean roads did more than move cargo. They wove the shared heritage of humanity, proving that the most valuable cargo was always the meeting of minds. The hero Gilgamesh stood at the edge of the waters of death, a place of unimaginable peril that no mortal had ever crossed. This epic, carved into clay tablets thousands of years ago, captures a universal truth. The ocean was the ultimate threshold between the known world and the realm of gods and monsters. From the Mesopotamian epic to the Greek tale of Jason and his Argonauts, these are not just fanciful stories. They are cultural memories, exaggerated and encoded over generations, preserving the very real dangers and wonders of ancient seafaring. The terrifying sea monsters and seductive sirens that populate these myths likely represent the very real hazards of rogue waves, sudden squalls, or unfamiliar sea life encountered by early mariners. The quest for a magical object like the Golden Fleece mirrors the immense economic drives behind real voyages for rare resources like tin, amber, or spices. These stories gave a narrative structure to the chaos of the open ocean, transforming a merchant's logbook into a hero's journey. Perhaps the most persistent mythical echo is that of a great flood. This story appears in Mesopotamian tablets, the Hebrew Bible, and Indian scriptures like the Mahabharata. While details differ, the core narrative is strikingly similar, a deluge wiping away a prior world. Geologists now point to a period of rapid sea level rise at the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago, which would have submerged vast coastal plains where early humans lived. For communities watching the shoreline relentlessly advance, this was a world-ending event, a trauma that became woven into their foundational myths. Similarly, Plato's story of Atlantis, a sophisticated island nation that sank beneath the waves in a single day and night, could be a distorted memory of a real catastrophe, such as the volcanic eruption that devastated Minoan Thera. The legend persists because it taps into a deep-seated anxiety about the fragility of even the most powerful maritime civilizations. The ocean itself was personified in divine form, a force to be appeased and respected. The Greek god Poseidon wielded his trident to stir up terrible storms, while the Polynesian deity Kanaloa ruled the deep sea and was associated with the voyaging canoes that ventured into his domain. These were not distant gods, they were active, temperamental participants in daily life. A safe voyage required their favor, and rituals developed to secure it. This spiritual relationship with the sea is visible in burial practices across cultures. From the Norse, who sent their chieftains to the afterlife on burning longships, to the Egyptian pharaohs whose solar barks were meant to carry them alongside the gods, the vessel became a powerful symbol of the transition from life to death, mirroring the journey from the known shore to the unknown horizon. Mythology also served a profoundly practical purpose. It was a vehicle for preserving vital navigational knowledge. The Polynesian creation chant, the Cumulipo, is a beautiful example. It begins with the emergence of the sea and the birth of sea creatures, progressing to plants, animals, and finally humans. This cosmological sequence is also a metaphorical map of the Pacific, embedding the origins of islands, currents, and sea life into a sacred narrative that was memorized and chanted. The stars that guided the first ancestors in the chant were the same stars that guided living navigators. In this way, essential survival information was wrapped in the powerful, unforgettable cloak of story, ensuring it was passed down faithfully through countless generations. So what truths lie behind these ancient stories? They are the psychological residue of humanity's relationship with the sea, a mixture of terror, reverence, and an unquenchable desire to see what lies beyond the horizon. Every legend of a lost land or a heroic voyage points to a real experience, a memory of a coastline that vanished, a journey that succeeded against all odds, or a ship that never returned. They remind us that the greatest maps were not always drawn on parchment, but were charted in the imagination long before the first sailor ever set forth. The ocean has never been a static stage for human history, but an active, shifting character in the story itself. A sudden shift in climate could open a new pathway to the horizon, while a change in wind patterns might close another for centuries. The very geography of the coastlines and the rhythm of the winds dictated where and how ancient mariners could sail, turning some regions into bustling maritime crossroads and leaving others in isolation. Consider the power of the monsoon systems in the Indian Ocean. For Arab and Indian traders, these were not unpredictable storms, but a reliable annual clock. The wind blew steadily from the southwest for 6 months, carrying ships laden with goods from Africa toward India. Then it reversed, blowing from the northeast for the other half of the year, bringing those same ships home. This predictable rhythm created distinct trade windows, entire seasons where the ocean became a bustling, liquid highway and then fell quiet. It was a system so dependable that it shaped calendars, economies, and cultural exchanges for thousands of years. In colder northern seas, the Vikings faced a very different set of challenges. Their longships, with their shallow drafts and flexible clinker-built hulls, were perfectly adapted to navigate the icy fjords, treacherous coastlines, and powerful North Atlantic currents. Their entire expansion into the North Atlantic, from the British Isles to Iceland and Greenland, was made possible by a period of unusual climatic warmth, now known as the medieval warm period. For several centuries, sea ice retreated, and sailing conditions became more predictable, allowing their iconic vessels to reach further than ever before. But when the climate shifted again, ushering in the Little Ice Age, those same ocean highways turned against them. The Greenland settlements, once viable outposts, found their supply lines from Europe choked by pack ice and ferocious storms. The environment that had enabled their expansion ultimately contributed to their collapse as the sea became an impassable barrier once more. Sometimes, the land itself conspired to erase maritime hubs from the map. The legendary port of Muziris in India, a crucial nexus for Roman trade, thrived for centuries, but shifts in river patterns and relentless siltation from the Periyar River gradually filled its harbor, burying the docks and warehouses under layers of mud. Once a bustling gateway to the east, it was slowly strangled by its own geography, its location lost until modern archaeologists unearthed its remains far inland. This constant dance with the environment required profound resilience and adaptation. Ancient mariners learned to read the world with an acuity we can scarcely grasp today. They knew that certain cloud formations gathering on the horizon meant a distant atoll, their undersides tinted green by the reflection of a lagoon. They understood that the specific behavior of seabirds could point the way to land dozens of miles away. They designed their vessels in direct conversation with their surroundings, the flexible, stitched plank dhows of the Arabian Sea, built to withstand monsoon swells, while the massive, square-rigged Roman corbetti were engineered to carry heavy cargoes across the stable summer Mediterranean. These civilizations did not simply conquer the sea, they learned its language and adapted to its moods, a lesson in resilience written in wood, wind, and wave. The story of the sea is not just a chronicle of kings and captains. In the bustling ports of the ancient world, women were often the invisible engine of maritime enterprise. While men were away on long voyages, women managed family businesses, oversaw the production of goods for export like textiles and pottery, and maintained the complex social networks that underpinned trade agreements. Their influence, however, extended far beyond the shore. In Egypt, the powerful pharaoh Hatshepsut did not merely send a fleet to the legendary land of Punt. She orchestrated the entire endeavor, using its success to solidify her divine right to rule. The reliefs at her temple immortalize this achievement, depicting not just the ships and their exotic cargo, but celebrating the female authority that made the voyage possible. This challenges our deepest assumptions about who held power in seafaring cultures. Archaeological discoveries continue to reshape this narrative. At the Viking Age trading center of Birka in Sweden, a grave long assumed to hold a high-status male warrior was revealed through modern osteological analysis to contain the skeleton of a woman. She was buried with a full suite of weapons, a strategy board game used for military tactics, and the remains of 2 horses. This finding suggests that some women in these mobile, maritime societies could attain roles of significant military and commercial leadership, their status earned through skill rather than constrained by gender. Further evidence comes from the Greek poet Sappho, who wrote vividly of the comings and goings of ships in her native Lesbos, her words hinting at a world where women were financially literate and actively engaged in the economic life of the port. Why then have these stories been so consistently overlooked? The bias of early historians, who often projected their own societal norms onto the past, combined with a focus on grand narratives of conquest, pushed women's contributions to the margins. Recognizing them does not just add names to a list, it fundamentally changes our understanding of how these civilizations functioned. In many cultures, women were the primary keepers of the very knowledge that made seafaring possible. In parts of Micronesia, for instance, crucial wayfinding skills and sacred chants were passed down through matrilineal lines, from a navigator to his sister's sons. This system ensured that vital maritime lore remained within a trusted family lineage, with women acting as the guardians of this intellectual capital. Their spiritual power was equally vital. Communities looked to female deities for protection on the treacherous waters. The Phoenicians worshipped Astarte, a goddess of the sea and fertility, while the Greeks honored Amphitrite, the queen of the ocean. These divine figures were not passive symbols. They were active forces invoked in rituals to calm storms and ensure safe passage, with priestesses often presiding over the ceremonies that sent fleets to sea. Even in the realm of legend, we find echoes of this female authority. The mysterious tale of the Japanese Queen Himiko, a powerful shaman ruler who communicated with neighboring kingdoms, suggests that female leadership could flourish in regions connected by sea routes, where influence was built on diplomacy and control of trade rather than pure military might. Recovering these lost voices does more than correct the historical record. It reveals the sea as a space of surprising social possibility. In the fluid, outward-looking world of port cities, women could sometimes carve out levels of economic independence and social influence that were unthinkable in more rigid, landlocked societies. Their stories remind us that the ocean highways were built and sustained by entire communities, not just the figures standing at the helm. That massive container ship gliding across the Indian Ocean is tracing a path etched into the seafloor by centuries of Arab dhows. The ancient and the modern are not separate, they are layers of the same continuous journey. Our globalized world, with its intricate supply chains and instant communication, stands on a foundation built by these lost seafaring civilizations. The very structure of international shipping, with its standardized containers and complex logistics, is a direct descendant of the systems first pioneered by the Phoenician merchants and the Hanseatic League. They created the original blueprint for moving goods across vast, multicultural distances, proving that the ocean is the planet's ultimate connective tissue. This legacy is written into our world in surprising ways. Linguistic maps tell a story of ancient voyages, with the spread of Austronesian languages across thousands of islands from Madagascar to Easter Island, forming a permanent record of the greatest human migration ever undertaken. Even our own bodies carry this history. Recent genetic studies reveal traces of Polynesian DNA in some indigenous South American populations, and potential evidence of pre-Columbian contact across the Pacific, suggesting that those epic voyages left a biological signature that echoes through the millennia. The rules that govern the sea today also have deep roots. Modern international maritime law, which defines territorial waters and protects freedom of navigation, draws inspiration from ancient codes like the Rhodian Sea Law, which governed Mediterranean trade over 2,000 years ago. The principle that the sea should be a space of orderly exchange, not anarchic conflict, is an idea as old as seafaring itself. Yet the most vital legacy may be the wisdom these cultures offer for our future. The Polynesian Voyaging Society does not simply rebuild ancient canoes, it revives a worldview. By sailing the Hokule'a across the world's oceans using traditional wayfinding, they champion a philosophy of sustainable travel and profound environmental observation. They remind us that true navigation requires a deep, respectful relationship with the natural world, a lesson of critical importance in our era of climate change. We see the ghosts of these maritime empires in modern geopolitics. China's Belt and Road Initiative, with its massive port developments, is often described as a new marine Silk Road, consciously echoing the trade networks of the Tang dynasty and the voyages of Zheng. The ambition to control global trade routes is as potent a force today as it was for the Srivijaya Empire. Meanwhile, museums from Oslo to Auckland bring this history to life, transforming sunken wrecks and weathered hulls into powerful educational tools that inspire new generations of explorers, artists, and storytellers. The successes and failures of these ancient mariners offer a mirror for our own times. Their stories teach us about the resilience needed to adapt to a changing climate, the fragility of interconnected networks, and the enduring human drive to explore. Their legacy is not locked in museums, but is alive in the routes we still sail, the languages we speak, and the urgent lessons they hold for navigating the uncertain waters of our own future. The vast, empty ocean was never truly empty. It was a crossroads, a marketplace, a conduit for the very essence of human progress, all because a handful of cultures dared to see the horizon as an invitation. Our journey across these lost sea roads reveals a story not of isolated peoples, but of a deeply interconnected ancient world. From the Minoan merchants and Phoenician innovators to the Polynesian wayfinders and Ming Chinese admirals, these civilizations shared a common thread, an irrepressible drive to explore and connect. They prove that the human spirit of discovery is as timeless as the sea itself. The diversity of their solutions is breathtaking. They built ships from reeds, from towering cedars, and from vast logs lashed together. They navigated by the stars, by the flight of birds, by the subtle language of ocean swells. They created systems of trade, law, and communication that wove distant continents into a single, vibrant tapestry of exchange. Spices, ideas, technologies, and beliefs flowed along these liquid highways, enriching every society they touched. Yet their fortunes were always tied to the environment. A shift in monsoon patterns or a sudden volcanic eruption could open new pathways or erase old ones forever, reminding us of the delicate balance between human ambition and the power of nature. These stories compel us to look at our world map with new eyes, see not just the land masses, but the blue spaces in between as the ancient superhighways they once were. Beneath those waves lies a hidden history of global connection, a web of human ingenuity that challenges the very notion of a disconnected past. The lessons from these lost mariners are more relevant than ever. In our own era of rapid globalization and environmental change, their experiences with interconnectedness, resilience, and cultural exchange offer profound insights. They teach us about the fragility of our networks and the enduring power of curiosity and cooperation. We would love to hear which of these ancient explorers most captures your imagination. Was it the Viking in their longship, the Polynesian navigator under a canopy of stars, or the Minoan trader in a bustling port? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this voyage into the deep past, subscribe for more journeys into history's greatest mysteries. Thank you for joining this exploration. May the stories of these courageous seafarers continue to inspire your own curiosity and respect for the incredible journeys that shaped our world.